In the last few weeks, the mystery surrounding 3i Atlas has taken a turn no one saw coming. What began as the discovery of our third interstellar visitor, an ancient piece of ice older than Earth itself, has escalated into something far stranger. This object isn't just passively drifting. Observations from the James Webb Space Telescope suggest it's altering its trajectory unnaturally. It's venting chemicals that look both industrial and potentially biological, including signs of liquid water. Most disturbingly, it seems to be reacting to us, changing its behavior as we watch. Could this interstellar visitor be doing more than just outgassing? Could it, in some sense, be alive? The mystery just got even stranger. If you're interested in this mysterious interstellar comet and want to know more about it, like and subscribe. Now let's step into what lies ahead. In the vast silent theatre of the cosmos, we are accustomed to watching ancient light from distant stars. But sometimes the cosmos sends visitors to us. In 2017, humanity detected the first Oumuamua. It was a strange tumbling shard, perhaps shaped like a cigar, accelerating away from our sun without a visible tail. It raised questions, whispering of possibilities just beyond our grasp. Then, in 2019, came the second 2i Borisov. This one felt more familiar. Borisov behaved just like one of our own comets trailing gas and dust, a reassuring sign that the universe perhaps followed the same rules everywhere. But this is different. The object designated 3i Atlas is only the third confirmed interstellar visitor humanity has ever seen, and it carries with it questions that cut far deeper than Oumuamua. Like its predecessors, astronomers at observatories like the Atlas Telescope in Chile first plotted its path. The data from multiple sources confirmed it was traveling on a hyperbolic trajectory. Envision a traveler moving so fast that our sun's gravity, a force that holds planets like giant Jupiter, and our own Earth in their orbits, cannot capture it. It is a path that comes from deep interstellar space, swings through our system once, and is destined to return to the cold dark between the stars. It is not bound to us. Yet from the very beginning, 3i Atlas presented an anomaly, a deep statistical impossibility. This interstellar traveler arriving from an unknown star system just happened to align almost perfectly with the ecliptic plane. This is the same flat disc-shaped path that our planets, including Earth, use to orbit the Sun. For a random object flung from another star, the odds of this alignment are almost zero. It would be like rolling a bowling ball from miles away and having it land perfectly in the groove of a spinning vinyl record. It was as if something had guided it, aimed it, directly into the orbital neighborhood that defines our solar system. This coincidence was the first clue. It suggested that the story of 3i Atlas was not one of random chance, but perhaps of arrival. That first anomaly of its alignment was unsettling, but it was only a statistical curiosity. The real shock came weeks later when astronomers realized 3i Atlas wasn't following the script. Initially based on its high velocity, NASA and the European Space Agency assumed it was already on its way out. We pictured it passing the cold red orbit of Mars, a planet that orbits at times over 400 million kilometers from our own Earth. We thought it was climbing deeper into the outer solar system, a fading point of light destined to be lost to us forever. When the James Webb Space Telescope, our most powerful infrared eye, reoriented its massive golden mirrors toward the object's last known coordinates, most scientists at the Space Telescope Science Institute expected nothing. Perhaps a faint trace of dust, the ghostly residue of a body long gone. Instead, Webb's instruments found it. And it was not faint. 3i Atlas was still here. It hadn't escaped. In late August of 2025, the refined tracking data began pouring in. Observatories from the high dry peaks of Mauna Kea in Hawaii to the Paranal Observatory in Chile, some of the clearest windows on Earth, all confirmed the same impossible fact. The object was on a curved inbound path. It was looping back, grazing the neighborhood between Mars and Earth's orbit. And then came the data point that changed everything. It wasn't just curving, it was slowing down. Observatories monitoring it in the infrared spectrum began reporting a measurable deceleration. This wasn't a subtle interpretation, it was a clear reading from the data. It was moving slower than Newton's laws of gravity predicted it should be. This single correction rewrote the entire mission. This interstellar visitor wasn't just passing through, it might be staying. The question became why? Why would a dead rock from another star, an object supposedly ruled only by gravity and momentum, suddenly apply the brakes? One theory, the natural explanation, emerged first. As 3I Atlas gets closer to our Sun, it heats up. Webb spectrometers confirmed it was venting gas, specifically a coma dominated by carbon dioxide, and as the Keck Observatory would later confirm, traces of nickel. Perhaps scientists speculated these strange gas jets are interacting with the intense solar radiation. Envision the Sun as a giant pressure washer blasting out a constant violent stream of particles called the solar wind. Maybe these gases are catching that wind, creating a form of cosmic drag, like a massive invisible parachute opening against the storm. It's a plausible natural explanation, but it doesn't feel comfortable, because the object's alignment is too precise, and its emissions, as we would soon learn, are far too controlled. This slowing down pattern, it doesn't look like random drag. It looks like a deliberate calculated braking maneuver. If this braking maneuver is real, 3I Atlas is approaching a critical unprecedented threshold. We must now talk about escape velocity. Picture our own Earth. We are moving through space at over 107,000 kilometers per hour, or about 67,000 miles per hour. It feels incredibly fast. But it is not fast enough to escape the enormous gravity of our Sun. We are captured. Neptune is captured. Every comet in the Oort cloud is captured. 3I Atlas was different. It arrived with enough speed to break that grip. It was supposed to fly past us and never return. But now it is slowing down. If its speed drops below that critical escape velocity during its closest approach to the Sun, it will fail to escape. It will be trapped. It will become the first interstellar body in human history to be captured by our solar system. It will cease to be a visitor and become a resident, a new temporary moon orbiting our star. This maneuver, this precise calculated use of gravity and thrust, it has a name. It is not a concept from geology. It is a technique from aerospace engineering. It is called the Oberth maneuver. We use it. NASA uses it extensively. When we wanted to send the Voyager probes to the outer solar system, we didn't have enough fuel, so we aimed them at Jupiter, letting them fall into its gravity well, and then fired their thrusters to gain a massive speed boost. When we wanted to touch the Sun itself, we sent the Parker Solar Probe. These multi-billion-dollar machines dive close to a massive body, fire their engines at the point of closest approach, and gain incredible velocity. 3I Atlas appears to be doing the opposite. It is aligning perfectly using the Sun's gravity well and perhaps firing its own jets against its path. Slowing down just enough for the Sun's gravity to permanently take hold. Avi Loeb, the Harvard astrophysicist, reviewed this data, the perfect alignment, the precise timing of the braking, and called the motion peculiar. It is of course possible that we are witnessing an incredible cosmic coincidence. A 1 in a trillion shot where a random comet just happens to mirror the exact conditions of a gravity assist maneuver. But the alignment with the ecliptic plane, the timing of its solar conjunction, and the deceleration just before it reaches perihelion, it all looks planned. It looks less like a rock tumbling through space and more like a ship carefully navigating a harbour. If this is true, it implies the trajectory was intentional. It implies the object chose this path. This hypothesis is staggering. A 7-mile wide object, engineered. But the strangeness of how it moves is matched only by the impossibility of what it is made of. The trajectory wasn't the only thing that didn't belong. When the James Webb Space Telescope and the Keck Observatory pointed their spectrometers at the object, they found a chemical signature, a signature that does not exist in nature. The trajectory of 3I Atlas was more than just peculiar. It was a riddle of physics, a challenge to our understanding of gravity and momentum. It suggested a level of control that was deeply unsettling. But the riddle of how it moved was about to be completely overshadowed by the paradox of what it was. When the James Webb Space Telescope turned its gaze toward this object, it did more than just take a picture. It deployed its suite of advanced spectrometers. You can envision these instruments like the near-infrared spectrograph as the most sensitive prisms ever built. They are engineering marvels capable of detecting the faintest whispers of light. They capture the hazy reflected light from the coma surrounding 3I Atlas and split it, stretching it into a long, detailed barcode of information. In this barcode, every element and every molecule leaves a unique, undeniable fingerprint. A dark absorption line here means carbon dioxide is present. A specific dip there means methane. It is the exact same technique Webb is currently using to hunt for atmospheres on distant exoplanets, those alien worlds orbiting stars many light years away. It is our primary tool in the search for life. When that first full spectrum analysis from Webb arrived on Earth in early September, it was so strange, so clean, that analysts at the Space Telescope Science Institute in Baltimore were forced to recheck every calibration line. They assumed their own multi-billion-dollar instrument was malfunctioning. The data wasn't noise, but it wasn't a normal comet either. A normal comet like Halley's Comet, or even the interstellar visitor 2I Borisov, is a dirty snowball. Its spectrum is a chaotic, messy soup of ice dust and simple organics, the random debris of a solar system's birth. This was not that. Webb's data showed a faint but repeating sequence of absorption patterns. This is the crucial point. When Webb's software analyzed the patterns they repeated too symmetrically, they suggested a structure. They hinted at organized chemistry. Organized chemistry is a term that sits uneasily between geology and biology. It implies a process, not just a static mixture. It is the profound difference between a random pile of bricks and a perfectly structured cathedral wall. The bricks are the same carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, but the arrangement implies intent, or at least a complex non-random system. At first, scientists tried to match these symmetrical patterns to simple organics, perhaps methane, perhaps formaldehyde. But the ratios were all wrong. The chemical signature was fundamentally alien, and hidden deep inside this clean, organized data cutting through the noise was the one signal that should not have been there. The one signature that changed the entire tone of the mission. The one reading that made the mystery of its trajectory seem trivial. The organized symmetrical patterns the James Webb Space Telescope detected were a profound mystery. They hinted at a complex system, but hidden deep inside that organized barcode of light was the one signal that changed the entire tone of the mission. It was not methane, it was not ammonia, it was the unmistakable spectral dip associated with molecular H2O, water. But this is the crucial distinction. When we look at our own solar system, we see water everywhere, but it's almost always in a form we expect. It is the signature of crystalline ice, the kind we see coating the miles-thick crust of Jupiter's moon Europa, or the bright shining rings of Saturn. Or it is the signature of vaporized frost, the gas that forms the beautiful million-mile-long tail of a normal comet as the sun heats it. The data from Webb's ENIA-SPEC instrument was neither of these. The data clearly showed the signal of liquid phase transitions. Let that sink in for a moment. Not ice, not gas. Liquid water. Under the ordinary conditions of space, this should be impossible. The vacuum of the void is a violent place for liquids. Suppose you are an astronaut floating in the silent blackness outside the International Space Station. You are in a vacuum millions of times less dense than the air in your room. If you open a simple bottle of Perrier, what happens? It does not drift away as a liquid. It does not instantly freeze into a solid block. It boils violently. In a vacuum, the boiling point of water is near absolute zero. It flashes into vapor, a cloud of gas that then immediately freezes into microscopic ice crystals. Liquid water in its stable form cannot exist out there. It is a physical impossibility. So how is 3I Atlas an interstellar object the size of Manhattan Island holding liquid water? This object has traveled for perhaps millions of years through the deep frozen void between stars, a place far colder than the darkest winter in Antarctica, yet it holds liquid. This is not just an anomaly, it is a fundamental contradiction of physics. The Webb spectrograph data itself offered the first clue. The object isn't naked. The water signal, while clear, was faint as if shielded. The data hinted at a thin film or perhaps vast reservoirs located beneath the surface. This suggested the object was protected by an insulating crust. We can envision this crust as a thick shell, perhaps kilometers deep, made of carbon dioxide ice, or what we call dry ice mixed with complex dark organics. It functions like a natural thermos, a cosmic Yeti cooler built to cosmic scales. This shell keeps the deep cold of interstellar space out and perhaps keeps some faint internal warmth in. This is plausible. We have a model for this right here in our own solar system. Jupiter's moon Europa and Saturn's moon Enceladus are both believed to have massive liquid water oceans sloshing beneath their thick insulating shells of ice. But this raises a much harder question. An insulator only slows heat loss. It cannot create heat. Europa and Enceladus are kept warm by the immense gravitational pull of their gas giants, Jupiter and Saturn, which constantly stretch and squeeze them like rubber balls, creating tidal friction. 3I Atlas has no giant planet. It has been alone in the dark. To maintain liquid water over millions of years, 3i Atlas must have its own engine. It must have a source of warmth. Where is the heat coming from? This question led mission scientists to a quiet but deeply unsettling proposal. If liquid water exists in these transient pockets, something must be maintaining that delicate balance. They offered two possibilities. First, a mechanism of heat exchange. This implies a machine, a complex geological engine perhaps, or something more. Manufactured. A system circulating warmth from a decaying radioactive core, much like the plutonium-238 cores that power our deep space probes like Voyager, keeping them alive in the cold. Second, they were forced to consider biochemical activity at a microscopic scale. Try to picture that. A vast, dark object the size of a city flying silently between the stars, and deep within its insulated crust in pockets of shielded liquid, microscopic life. Living, metabolizing, consuming chemicals and generating tiny amounts of waste heat. Like the slow, steady warmth of a compost heap, but on a cosmic scale. Enough heat generated over eons to keep small pockets of water just above freezing. This is the threshold where geology ends and biology begins. The presence of liquid water, the solvent for all life we know, is the single most profound discovery we could make. It suggests 3i Atlas is in some way alive, but this biological hypothesis was immediately shattered by the other signal Webb and the Keck Observatory detected. It was a chemical that has no business being near liquid water, a chemical that does not exist in nature at all. The discovery of water, the very solvent of life, pushed 3i Atlas into a new profound category. We were no longer just observing a rock, we were contemplating an arc. Scientists at NASA and the European Space Agency were quietly asking if this interstellar traveler was in some microscopic way biologically active. But this profound biological hypothesis was immediately shattered by the next signal. The data stream arriving from the Keck 2 Observatory. Envision the Keck 2 telescope. It is a marvel of engineering, a giant mechanical eye 10 meters across sitting over 13,000 feet high on the dark, dormant peak of Mauna Kea in Hawaii. It is one of the most powerful telescopes on Earth. Its high-resolution spectrometer pointed at the faint hazy coma of 3i Atlas and analyzed the metals being vented into space. It found nickel, a lot of it. The readings showed that 3i Atlas was releasing about 4 grams of nickel every single second. To make that tangible picture, take a United States nickel coin from your pocket. That coin weighs almost exactly 5 grams. Now imagine vaporizing almost one of those coins every single second, 24 hours a day, creating a steady metallic gas. That alone would have been strange. But the real shock, the data point that sent a chill through the astrophysics community, came from what was missing. There was no measurable iron in the emissions. To us on Earth, that might not sound strange. But to an astrophysicist, that is a shattering impossibility. Nickel and iron are cosmic twins. They are forged together in the same nuclear furnace in the dying explosive hearts of massive stars in the events we call supernovae. They are the core components of all rocky planets, including our own Earth's core, which is a giant molten ball of iron and nickel. Every comet, every asteroid, every meteorite we have ever studied in our solar system or beyond has shown nickel and iron in roughly equal amounts. They are chemically fundamentally linked. Finding one without the other in nature is like finding a human shadow that isn't attached to a human. But 3i Atlas had somehow broken this fundamental rule. It was giving off nickel in perfect isolation, as if the iron had been meticulously filtered out. When the exhausted analysts ran the spectral signature, this pure nickel signal, through the astronomical databases, no natural match was found. But when they cross-referenced it with industrial chemical databases, one match stood out. A signature so perfect it was undeniable: nickel tetracarbonyl. That name might not mean much to you, but what it represents will. Nickel tetracarbonyl is a refined, volatile, and highly toxic metallic gas. It doesn't exist naturally in space. In fact, it doesn't exist anywhere in nature at all. On Earth, it only appears inside factories and advanced laboratories. We create it through sophisticated industrial chemical processes like the Mond process, which we use to separate and purify metals. We use this gas to create the super strong coatings on jet turbines and manufacture high-performance aerospace alloys. It is in every sense of the word a post-industrial technological solvent. Avi Loeb, the Harvard astrophysicist, put it bluntly, "This alloy has only ever been seen in human factories, never in a comet, never in space, never in nature." This discovery stunned the scientific community. It presented a contradiction that tears our theories apart. How can one object 3I Atlas simultaneously show signs of liquid water, the cradle of biology, and nickel tetracarbonyl, the signature of industry? We are forced to choose between two impossible realities. The first is the natural hypothesis. Perhaps 3I Atlas formed around a carbon-rich iron-poor star, an exotic star unlike any in our region of the galaxy, where the usual balance of metals was skewed from birth. Perhaps some extreme oxidation process we've never seen before stripped away all the iron. It's a natural explanation, but it requires us to invent entirely new, unobserved stellar chemistry. The second hypothesis is far simpler and far more terrifying. What if the reason it looks industrial is because it is? What if the absence of iron isn't a natural anomaly but a sign of refinement? What if 3I Atlas is not a comet at all but a machine, or the derelict fragment of one? The debrief publication summed it up perfectly. If this is natural, it's chemistry we've never seen before. If it's artificial, it's evidence we weren't expecting. It is the calling card of something that was made, not born. An object carrying liquid water like a biological ark, yet venting industrial gas like a derelict factory. This paradox only deepened when scientists stopped looking at what it was made of and focused on how it was flying. Because its physical behavior was even more impossible than its chemical makeup. When scientists using the Hubble Space Telescope and the James Webb Space Telescope first noticed 3I Atlas venting gas, they expected to see something familiar. We have all seen images of comets. Picture Halley's Comet, or the brilliant comet Neowise that graced our skies in 2020. They are beautiful primarily because of their magnificent tails. A comet's tail is a simple, predictable, fundamental rule of physics. Envision our sun. It is not just a quiet source of light and warmth. It is a violent, chaotic engine. It blasts out the solar wind, a constant million-mile-per-hour stream of charged particles, and floods the solar system with intense solar radiation. A comet's tail made of vaporized ice and dust is utterly powerless against this onslaught. It acts like a giant delicate windsock in a cosmic hurricane. The solar wind always pushes the tail directly away from the sun. Always. That is the rule. But when Hubble and Webb began monitoring 3I Atlas in infrared and ultraviolet light, they saw something no one could explain. 3I Atlas was active. It was venting a steady plume of gas. We could even identify the components carbon dioxide cyanide and those trace amounts of nickel gas. But the plume was not pointing away from the sun. 3I Atlas was ejecting a steady focused jet of material directly toward the sun. Let us be perfectly clear. This is the exact opposite of what physics predicts. It is like standing in the middle of a Category 5 hurricane and spitting directly into the storm only to watch your spit travel against the 150 mile/hour wind. It is like a ship on Earth's ocean raising its sail not to be pushed by the wind but to somehow push against it. This discovery sent shockwaves through the astronomy community. Under normal physics, this should not be possible. Every natural explanation began to fail. A tail pointed in the wrong direction. This wasn't just a random outgassing from a melting ice patch. It looked focused, it looked controlled, it looked stable, and that perfect impossible stability raised an even deeper paradox. According to Sir Isaac Newton, if 3I Atlas is firing a massive jet toward the sun, that action must have an equal and opposite reaction. It should be pushing the object off its course. It should be drifting. But it wasn't. The physics of the sunward plume were already a profound contradiction. This phenomenon, which we observed using the Hubble Space Telescope and the James Webb Space Telescope, defied the known rules of solar radiation pressure. It was like a flag flying directly into the wind. But this behavior, as strange as it was only a directional anomaly. It was the consequence of that plume that would present the deepest, most fundamental paradox of the entire encounter. We must now talk about Sir Isaac Newton. His third law of motion, published in his Principia in 1687, is the foundation of our entire technological civilization. It is not a theory. It is a fundamental rule of the universe. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. This law is why a rocket launches. Envision the Saturn V rocket, the most powerful machine humanity has ever built. It stood 36 stories tall, higher than the Statue of Liberty, and weighed over 6 million pounds. It worked by throwing massive quantities of fire and gas down with unimaginable violence, creating an equal and opposite reaction that pushed the Apollo astronauts up toward the moon. This law is why a simple fire hose on Earth often requires 2 or 3 firefighters to hold it. The intense force of the water pushing out of the nozzle creates an equal crushing kickback, a force pushing back. 3i Atlas is a giant fire hose. The data from Webb and Hubble was clear and unambiguous. It is ejecting approximately 330 pounds, that is about 150 kilograms of gas and material every single second. To put that in perspective, that is the weight of a large adult human vaporized and fired into space every single second. That is not a tiny leak from a melting ice patch. That is a significant, powerful thruster. It is a continuous focused directional force. If 3i Atlas is pushing 150 kilograms of material toward the Sun every second, Newton's third law demands it requires that the object must be pushed away from the Sun. Its orbit should visibly change. It should drift. We should see it accelerating off its predicted gravitational path. This non-gravitational acceleration is a standard calculation NASA performs on every comet in the solar system. We expected to see a slight push. We expected to measure the drift. Instead, the data came back. More than 4,000, let me repeat that, 4,000 separate positional measurements from observatories all over the Earth, all tracking this one object, confirmed the same impossible result. The non-gravitational acceleration measures at 0. Pause and truly consider what this means. It is like watching that Saturn V rocket ignite its 5 F1 engines, consume 30 tons of fuel per second, and simply hover, refusing to move an inch. It is like watching those firefighters aim the hose, unleash a torrent of water, and feel no kickback at all. The object is ignoring Newton. Physics is not optional. It is the operating system of the universe. An object cannot simply decide to ignore it, yet 3i Atlas does. It moves as though anchored, locked in place, utterly indifferent to the massive forces it is unleashing from its own body. This violation is so profound that it forced scientists like Avi Loeb to propose a radical idea: this must be an intentional alignment. What if this isn't a random cometary jet? What if the plume we see pointing toward the Sun isn't the only plume? Try to picture a modern spacecraft like the International Space Station. It is a delicate, sprawling structure the size of an American football field. When an astronaut on the ISS wants to adjust its orbit, or just stop it from tumbling, they don't fire one giant engine. The ISS fires multiple small reaction control system thrusters. It fires them in perfect computer-controlled balance in opposite directions to rotate or move. The key is balance. The forces cancel each other out, resulting in a net acceleration of 0. What if 3i Atlas is doing the same thing? What if the 150 kilogram per second plume we see is just one part of a complex balance system? What if there are other vents, other plumes perhaps invisible or smaller, firing in opposite directions with perfect precision, cancelling each other out? If that is true, the implications are staggering. It moves 3i Atlas from the category of natural anomaly to technological marvel. It implies a complex internal system. It implies computation. It implies design. But this designed hypothesis presents its own immediate physical problem. How could a 7-mile wide object the size of Manhattan Island maintain this perfect instantaneous balance? How is it built? Science offers 2 possible explanations. The first one deals with sheer brute force. This explanation assumes the object is being pushed, but that the push is simply too small to matter. For this to be true, 3i Atlas would have to be unbelievably massive, fantastically dense. Based on its brightness and the assumptions of its density, the latest models estimate its mass at over 33 billion tons. Let us try to anchor that number. We are all familiar with mountains. The largest mountain on our planet Earth, Mount Everest, weighs approximately 16 billion tons. You're looking at an object more than twice as heavy as Mount Everest flying through our solar system at interstellar speeds. In this scenario, the 150 kilogram thruster is like a single housefly landing on an aircraft carrier. The force is technically there, but it is so infinitesimal compared to the object's crushing inertia that our best instruments cannot measure the change. This is the natural explanation. That 3i Atlas is simply the heaviest, densest comet-like object humanity has ever recorded. It is a solid metallic core, a remnant from an ancient planetary system, a cosmic cannonball fired from a star long dead. This theory seems plausible. It respects Newton's laws. There is just one problem. Other data from different instruments, suggests the exact polar opposite. While the James Webb Space Telescope and Hubble gave us the chemical data our ground-based radar systems gave us the shape. Envision this process. From Earth giant radio dishes like the former Arecibo Observatory in Puerto Rico, or the Goldstone Deep Space Communications Complex in California fire powerful focused beams of radio waves across millions of miles. These waves traveling at the speed of light strike 3i Atlas and bounce back. We are not taking a picture, we are listening for the echo. This echo, when analysed by supercomputers, slowly builds a three-dimensional model of the object's shape and crucially its density. The Webb composite imagery already hinted at a strange cylindrical central form, but the radar reflections, they were bizarre. The returning signals fluctuated wildly. The echo was not clean. This data proved one crucial fact: the interior of 3i Atlas was not solid. The radar penetrated the surface and revealed that the interior is interlaced with cavities or channels, and these weren't random collapsed caves, the kind you might find in volcanic rock on Earth. The radar showed these voids had an oddly ordered geometry, a structure, a precision. Source File 1 in its analysis compared this internal symmetry to that of Radiolarians, microscopic marine organisms on Earth, whose intricate hollow silica shells mirror mathematical perfection. It is a level of precision that nature rarely, if ever, achieves by random chance on the scale of a 7-mile wide object. This data shatters the superdense theory. An object cannot be both a solid 33 billion ton cannonball and a hollowed-out structure full of ordered channels. This leads us to the second, more radical hypothesis to solve the zero-drift paradox. What if 3i Atlas isn't incredibly dense? What if it is hollow? What if those oddly ordered channels and cavities are not natural formations? What if they are the internal balancing systems we speculated about? Picture a vast, complex network of tunnels and voids. When the main thruster fires forward, these internal systems perhaps vent other gases in other directions, absorbing the momentum, perfectly cancelling out the drift, keeping the entire structure stable. This would mean the object is not a rock, it is a machine. Richard Chloe of Harvard University summarized this impossible crossroads. Either it's the heaviest comet ever, or it's something designed to resist drift. We are left staring at two contradictions. One theory requires us to believe in an object of almost supernatural density which is contradicted by radar. The other requires us to believe in an engineered object the size of Manhattan Island, a hollowed-out self-balancing arc. This idea, a hollow machine, solves the physics paradox, but it opens a new one. A machine needs power. A hollow structure flying for millions of years through the absolute zero of interstellar space would be frozen solid. What is running this system? What is keeping it warm? A machine needs power. A hollow structure flying for millions of years through the absolute zero of interstellar space should be frozen solid. What is running this complex self-balancing system? What is keeping it warm? The answer when it came was even more disturbing. It doesn't get its primary power from our sun. It generates power from within. Brightness alone, the visible light we see, could just be a reflection. But the James Webb Space Telescope has other eyes. It has MIRI, the mid-infrared camera. MIRI is a specialized instrument. It is in effect a thermal detector of exquisite sensitivity. It doesn't just see the light that bounces off an object. It sees the heat glow that the object itself is emitting. It sees warmth. And when MIRI stared at 3i Atlas, it recorded something no reflection could possibly justify. It detected thermal spikes. It saw heat radiating from within the object itself. Let us be perfectly clear about the conditions. At this point in its orbit, 3i Atlas was still immensely far from the Sun, hundreds of millions of kilometers away, drifting in the cold, dark region between the orbits of Mars and Jupiter. If you were standing on its surface, the Sun would look like little more than an intensely bright star. The warmth we feel here on Earth, which powers our entire biosphere, is a distant memory out there. The weak solar heating it receives simply could not explain the intensity of these heat emissions. At first, analysts at the Space Telescope Science Institute blamed instrument noise. This is standard procedure. They assumed stray cosmic rays, high-energy particles from deep space, were hitting the MIRI detector and creating false positive signals. But when other observatories looking independently confirmed the same patterns, the conclusion became unavoidable. SOFIA, the Stratospheric Observatory for Infrared Astronomy, was deployed. SOFIA is a marvel of engineering, a massive 10-foot telescope mounted inside a modified Boeing 747 jumbo jet. It flies at 45,000 feet above 99% of Earth's water vapor to get a crystal-clear infrared view. Sophia confirmed the thermal glow. Simultaneously, the new Vera C. Rubin Observatory in Chile during its calibration phase matched the same thermal patterns. The heat was real. What could be the source? The thermal spike suggested an internal source of power. The most natural explanation was radioactive decay. Perhaps like our Voyager probes, or the Perseverance rover on Mars' 3I Atlas, was powered by a core of decaying radioactive isotopes, a lump of plutonium-238, for example, generating a faint, steady warmth for eons. This would be a stunning discovery in itself, a natural radioisotope thermoelectric generator of immense scale. But the heat wasn't steady. It was pulsing, and this discovery led to the strangest pattern yet. For ordinary comets, the model is simple. The sun warms the surface, then the gas escapes. Heat first, venting second. But 3I Atlas had the pattern inverted. The thermal data from the MIRI instrument and the Sophia Flying Observatory confirmed it. 3I Atlas was generating its own heat independent of our sun. This fact alone was extraordinary. It placed the object in a category far beyond any normal comet. But the true anomaly was not that it was hot, but how it was hot. The James Webb Space Telescope did not just measure the heat, it measured the timing of the heat. It correlated the thermal spikes microsecond by microsecond with the venting of its carbon dioxide and nickel-laced plumes. What it found was a complete inversion of cometary physics. Let's clarify this because this point is critical. Envision a normal comet, a dirty snowball orbiting our sun. We have studied thousands of them. The process of its activity is simple and passive. The sun, the external heat source, shines on one side of the comet. That specific patch of ice on the surface warms up. The ice turns directly into gas, a process called sublimation. This gas escapes, forming a jet which we see as the comet's tail. As the gas escapes, it rapidly cools the surface like sweat evaporating from your skin. It follows a simple passive sequence. First, the external heat from the sun arrives. That heat directly leads to the venting of gas, and that venting results in cooling. It is a simple reaction. 3I Atlas does the exact opposite. The Webb data showed a clear repeating pattern. The heat came first, then the venting followed. This is definitive proof. The heat source must be internal. The venting is not a reaction to the sun. It is the consequence of its own internal engine. Try to picture this mechanism. Something deep inside 3I Atlas, perhaps near that radioactive core we speculated about, begins to warm up. This internal heat builds, perhaps warming those hidden pockets of liquid water we detected earlier, flashing them into high-pressure steam. The pressure from the resulting gas becomes too great until it finds a weak point in the crust and erupts in a focused plume. The object vents, releasing the pressure, and then it cools down, only for the internal engine to begin the cycle all over again. This discovery pushed the science teams to revisit the data from Oumuamua, the first interstellar object. Oumuamua's mysterious acceleration back in 2017 had been attributed to outgassing without visible jets, a theory that was always debated and felt incomplete. But now, with 3I Atlas showing these powerful internally driven thermal oscillations, a new alien thread began to connect them. Perhaps interstellar bodies carry energy systems unlike anything in our solar system. But the most disturbing part was the rhythm. This internal source of power wasn't a steady, constant glow like the simple, predictable decay of a radioactive isotope. The data showed it was pulsing like a heartbeat. It was a regulated cycle. Heat, release, cool, heat, release, cool. If this was a natural geological process, it was one of incredible stability. But the pulsing felt too deliberate. This wasn't just a random geological geyser, like Old Faithful on Earth erupting when pressure builds. This was a mechanism. We had established an internal engine, a mechanism. But the most disturbing part was the rhythm. This internal source of power wasn't a steady, constant glow, like the simple, predictable decay of a radioactive isotope. The data from the James Webb Space Telescope showed it was pulsing like a heartbeat. Just how precise was this heartbeat? The answer came not from orbit, but from the ground. Follow-up observations from the dark, high-altitude peaks of Mauna Kea in Hawaii and the Paranal Observatory in Chile, some of the most advanced observatories on Earth, confirmed this pulsing behavior in visible light. This wasn't just a general observation. The data was statistical. The bursts of brightness, the thermal spikes. They repeated with an almost unnerving rhythmic precision. We're not talking about the rough, semi-predictable timing of a geological geyser on Earth. Picture Old Faithful in Yellowstone National Park. It is a famous natural clock, but it is a chaotic one. It erupts every 60 to 90 minutes. The interval varies. It is geological. 3i Atlas was not geological. The data showed its pulses repeated within a margin of just a few seconds per cycle. This is not the stability of a geyser. This is the stability of a machine. It's the kind of precision we on Earth associate with a quartz watch or an atomic clock, not a tumbling 7-mile-wide piece of interstellar rock. This rhythmic precision pushed scientists far beyond the comfort of known physics. What are we witnessing? If this is a natural mechanism, it must be incredibly stable, an alien energy system whose physics we do not yet comprehend. Perhaps some exotic geochemical reaction, or a magnetic field interaction we have no model for. But the other possibility lingered, the one that resonated with the pulsing, rhythmic nature of the signal. What if this isn't geology at all? What if we're witnessing the slow respiration of something ancient, something self-regulated, something that has been breathing silently in the dark for eons, long before our own civilization learned to build fires? We had an object that was demonstrably not just a rock. It possessed an internal engine. It maintained its own heat. It pulsed with the regularity of a heartbeat, and it carried both the ingredients for life, liquid water, and the markers of industry. It was a machine. It was an ark. It was a living paradox. Everything was already impossible. And then, 3i Atlas began to speak. The event occurred during a routine observation window. The James Webb Space Telescope, our $10 billion eye in the dark, was performing a long exposure scan. Its primary instruments, the NER spec, or the near-infrared spectrograph, and the MIRI mid-infrared instrument, were locked onto the target, drinking in the faint ancient light. The telemetry stream, the constant invisible river of data flowing from the telescope across millions of miles of space to the giant deep space network dishes on Earth in places like Goldstone, California, or Madrid, Spain, was stable. Suddenly the signal vanished. We are not talking about a flicker or a moment of static. The data stream went dead. For 6 minutes, there was nothing. At NASA's Mission Control Center, a 6-minute blackout from a flagship telescope is a terrifying event. It is the sound of failure. It is the same deafening silence that engineers experienced moments before the Challenger disaster, or the silence they dread when a Mars lander is supposed to touch down. It suggests a catastrophic failure. Engineers immediately scrambled, checking the Webb subsystems. They checked the power levels. They checked the pointing accuracy of the telescope's main mirror. They checked the health of the high-gain antenna. The result of that diagnostic was the real anomaly. Everything was nominal. Webb was perfectly healthy. Its power was stable. Its mirrors were locked. It was still pointed directly at 3i Atlas. It was by all accounts still collecting data. The only anomaly was the data stream itself. How can a telescope be working perfectly yet send back nothing? It wasn't that the signal was lost. It was that the signal had changed. The official report later leaked stated that every sensor pointed at 3i Atlas had simultaneously gone out of phase. Picture this. It's like listening to a perfectly clear orchestra, and suddenly every single instrument, the violins, the cellos, the trumpets, all simultaneously shift their tuning by exactly half a note. The sound is still there, the instruments are still playing, but it's no longer music, it's just noise. When the engineers finally reconstructed that lost 6-minute window, they found something unnerving. The readings didn't show random noise, the kind of static you get from deep space. And they didn't show blank gaps, which would imply the sensor was off. The 6-minute blackout was over. The screens at NASA's Mission Control, which had been blank, flickered back to life. The telemetry stream from the James Webb Space Telescope was re-established. But the data was wrong. It was corrupted. Or rather, it had been changed. When the engineers at the Space Telescope Science Institute in Baltimore, the people who actually fly the telescope, finally reconstructed that lost 6-minute window, they found that the sensors had not in fact recorded nothing. They had recorded an overwhelming signal. They called it crossband interference. This is not the random static of deep space, the faint passive hiss of the cosmic microwave background, which is the echo of the Big Bang. This was not a cosmic ray particle hitting the sensor. This was an active structured signal on top of the 3i Atlas data. Envision this again. You're trying to listen to a faint distant whisper. The whisper is the ancient light from 3i Atlas. Suddenly someone walks into the room and begins playing a loud, clear, pure musical note. Your ears are overwhelmed. You can no longer hear the whisper. 3i Atlas, or something at 3i Atlas, had begun to play a note. When the analysts filtered out the noise, they found the pattern. It was a faint oscillating waveform repeating every 1.7 seconds. A steady pulse, a beat, pulse, 1.7 seconds, pulse, 1.7 seconds, pulse. A human resting heart beats about once per second. This was a slow, deliberate, almost mechanical rhythm. It was a signal. This is the moment when the entire investigation pivoted. This is the moment 3i Atlas changed from a celestial curiosity into a potential contact. The data looked eerily like a modulated transmission. We on Earth use modulated transmissions every single day. It is the foundation of our entire global communication system. When you're in your car, you tune the radio to 101.1 FM. The FM or frequency modulation signal carries the music. You tune to 880 AM. The AM amplitude modulation signal carries the news talk. In both cases, the radio wave itself is just a carrier, a dumb wave. The information is encoded by changing it, changing its frequency, or changing its amplitude, its strength. 3i Atlas was using amplitude modulation. It was sending a signal that was getting stronger and weaker in that precise repeating 1.7 second pattern. This discovery triggered protocols. The data was quietly sent to the SETI Institute, short for the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. It was run through every decryption algorithm NASA and presumably the National Security Agency possess. They searched for binary data, the ones and zeros that make up all of our computer languages. They searched for prime numbers like 2357, the universal language of mathematics. They searched for the emission line of hydrogen, the most common element in the universe, the watering hole frequency, where any advanced civilization might choose to broadcast. They found nothing, no data, no message. This was the second and perhaps stranger anomaly. The signal was the message. The data showed it was pure amplitude modulation. This means it was not carrying a separate complex message like a voice or a picture. The signal itself, the simple repeating 1.7 second pulse, was the entire communication. This baffled the analysts. If you have the technology to broadcast a signal across millions of miles, why send an empty 1-1 hypothesis began to form? What if this wasn't an empty signal? What if it was a fundamental one? What if this wasn't an attempt to send language like ABC or mathematics like 1, 2, 3? What if this was an attempt to communicate in the most basic universal language of all physics, a simple repeating wave, an announcement, a statement, I am here, I am structured, I am not random. It was a signal of existence itself. This single 1.7 second waveform was already the most important discovery in human history. But it wasn't the only pattern. When the engineers looked closer, they realized this pulse was connected to something else. It was connected to the heartbeat of the object itself. The discovery of the 1.7 second pulse was staggering. It was a modulated transmission, an artificial signal coming from an interstellar object. But the message itself was empty. It contained no binary data, no prime numbers, no recognizable language. This was the central puzzle. Why broadcast a signal that says nothing? We were faced with a transmission that had a clear rhythm, but no content. The engineers at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory and the Space Telescope Science Institute, the people responsible for analyzing Webb's data, couldn't find a message in the wave, so they began to analyze the wave itself. They treated it not as a message, but as a sound. Envision a sound engineer in a recording studio. When they analyze a recording, they don't just see a single line. They use complex tools like spectral filters or Fourier analysis to break the sound down into its component parts. When they listen to a single guitar note, they don't just hear the main note, the fundamental. They also hear a rich tapestry of other fainter, higher-pitched notes. These are the harmonics. These harmonics are what give the guitar its unique texture, its warmth, the very quality that makes it sound different from a piano or a violin playing the exact same note. The engineers applied this same logic to the 3i Atlas signal. They ran the 1.7 second pulse through their advanced spectral filters, trying to clean it up to find its texture. What they found was structure. Hidden underneath the main pulse, they discovered faint secondary harmonics. This was not just random static. This was not the noise of a cheap microphone. These harmonics were organized. They appeared as distinct rhythmic peaks in the data, and this is the moment that connected everything. This is where the physics of the object and the signal from the object became one. These rhythmic peaks, these faint secondary harmonics, they followed the exact same 9-hour rotation pattern that the James Webb Space Telescope had already recorded in Chapter 4. Let us restate that because it is the key. The object's heartbeat, that 9-hour thermal pulse from its internal engine, was musically related to its voice, the 1.7-second interference signal. The two systems were linked. This changes everything. The signal is not random. It is not an empty broadcast. It is physically and mathematically tied to the structure and rotation of 3I Atlas itself. This implies intent. It suggests the object is intentionally encoding its own physical properties into the signal. It's not sending a message like, hello. It's sending a message like, I am structured, I am 9 hours long, this is my rhythm. It was a self-portrait painted in radio waves, a signal with such clear, calculated intent. This hypothesis was too radical. It was too much to believe. It was just a pattern, wasn't it? There was only one way to know. The scientists at NASA Mission Control had to break the first rule of observation. They had to stop just listening. They decided to move from passive observation to an active experiment. They decided to poke the object, and 3I Atlas responded. The signal from 3I Atlas was no longer passive. It was a structured harmonic broadcast, a self-portrait painted in radio waves. This hypothesis was too profound, too radical to ignore. Scientists at NASA Mission Control at the Space Telescope Science Institute in Baltimore realized they were no longer just observing a comet. They were potentially in contact with an intelligence. This realization shifted the entire protocol. This was no longer astronomy. This was something else. They had to break the first rule of observational science: do not interfere with the subject. You watch, you never touch. But the object had already touched them by interfering with their telescope. They decided to move from passive observation to an active experiment. They decided to poke the object to see if it would poke back. The test was simple yet brilliant. It was initiated by the James Webb Space Telescope team. If 3I Atlas was truly reacting to being observed as the data now suggested, what would happen if we suddenly stopped observing it? The team initiated a controlled test. They decided to create deliberate blind spots in their observation schedule. Envision the James Webb Space Telescope, this $10 billion instrument floating silently at the L2 Lagrange point 1 million miles from Earth. Its sensors are locked onto the target, its giant golden mirror drinking in the data. Then a command traveling at the speed of light is sent from Mission Control. Webb receives the command, it pauses its data stream, it doesn't look away, it simply closes its eyes. The data feed at Mission Control went dark for exactly 7 minutes. 7 minutes, about the time it takes to brew a cup of coffee on Earth. For the engineers and astrophysicists watching the screens, it must have felt like an eternity. On Earth, it was a short pause. In space, it was a message, a question. Are you still there? After exactly 7 minutes, the eyes opened. The Webb data stream resumed. The response was immediate. At the very instant the feed resumed, the object's brightness spiked once sharply, before returning to its normal baseline. This was interesting. It was a statistical anomaly. It could have been a coincidence. A random thermal pulse like the heartbeat we saw in Chapter 4 that just happened to align with their 7-minute test. The team at STSCI was split. It was compelling, but it was not definitive proof. Science demands repeatability. So they repeated the test. They had to. They let the baseline data stabilize. Then again, the command was sent from Mission Control. Webb's sensors went dark. This time perhaps they used a new randomized pattern, a different duration. They waited. The seconds ticked by, the stream resumed, and 3I Atlas responded. This time it did not emit one spike, it emitted 2 spikes. 2 sharp, distinct flares of light perfectly timed to the new pattern. This was the moment. This was the discovery that changed everything. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't geology. It was feedback. 3I Atlas was not merely scattering light. It was actively synchronizing to human observation. It wasn't just aware that it was being watched. It was engaging with the act of being watched. It was participating in the experiment. We humanity had sent a signal by not sending one, and this interstellar traveler, this ancient hollow machine, had signaled back. We had established a two-way conversation. The implications were almost too much to process. We were in a dialogue. But as the stunned analysts looked closer at the data, at the timing of the response, they found something even more impossible. The object wasn't just reacting to the test, it was reacting faster than the test. The feedback test was a success. It was the smoking gun. The James Webb Space Telescope poked 3I Atlas and the object signaled back. The synchronization was undeniable, but as the stunned analysts at the Space Telescope Science Institute in Baltimore, Maryland looked closer at the data, they found something that turned their blood cold. They were looking at the timing of the response. The object wasn't just reacting to the test, it was reacting faster than the test. When we on Earth react to something, there is a delay. It is a fundamental law of causality. If you touch a hot stove, your nerves must send a signal to your brain, and your brain must send a signal back to your hand. This process, while fast, takes milliseconds. The response always comes after the stimulus. Cause must precede effect. 3I Atlas seemed to violate this. The analysts reviewed the telemetry from Webb's internal systems. They made a terrifying discovery. The object's response, the flare of light, didn't happen after the blackout began. It happened milliseconds before the scheduled capture sequence. Let us be perfectly clear. 3I Atlas was not reacting, it was anticipating. Imagine you are the analyst at STSCI staring at this data on your screen at 3 in the morning. You would assume your instruments are wrong. You would run the diagnostics again and again. But the data remains the same. The effect is happening before the cause. How is that possible? How can it predict the future? The answer they concluded is that it wasn't predicting the future, it was sensing the present, with a sensitivity we cannot match. The answer lies in the complexity of the James Webb Space Telescope itself. Webb isn't a simple light switch. You cannot just turn it on and off. It is one of the most complex machines ever built. Before it begins a data collection sequence, before the shutter opens, its internal systems must prepare. Its onboard computers must synchronize data buffers. Its sensors must run calibration checks. Its fine guidance sensor, the secondary telescope that acts as Webb's anchor in the void, must lock onto guide stars, and its 18 golden mirror segments must phase together perfectly. These preparations, while tiny, send out subtle frequency changes, faint, almost imperceptible electromagnetic tells. It is the tell of a complex machine preparing to act. 3I Atlas was detecting these tells. It wasn't reacting to the blackout, it was reacting to the preparation for the blackout. This changes everything. This is not a simple stimulus response. A sunflower on Earth turns toward the sun. That is a simple biological reaction. An amoeba recoils from a bright light. That is a simple programmed response. This is analysis. This is pattern recognition. This is prediction. This is an object that is monitoring our most advanced piece of technology in real time. It is sensing the handshake protocols of Webb's internal timing cycles. It is listening to the inner workings of the telescope itself. This predictive precision, this ability to understand how our machine works and act before it does, it goes beyond physics. It suggests computation. We, humanity, built the James Webb Space Telescope. It is the peak of our intelligence, a $10 billion autonomous robot. We sent it 1 million miles from Earth to observe the universe, and when it stared at 3I Atlas, the object stared back, and it understood our telescope's internal operating system. This implies an intelligence, not necessarily a conscious one like a human, but a computational one like an advanced AI. It implies the hollow machine we hypothesized in Chapter 3 has a CPU. It implies the internal engine we found in Chapter 4 also has a mind. We thought we were the observers, the ones safely behind the glass watching the experiment. The data from these milliseconds proved that the experiment was mutual. We were being watched by the experiment. This confirmation of computation was a terrifying realization. We were communicating with an active intelligence. But what kind of intelligence? Was it cold, digital, and alien, or was it something else? The answer was found not in the timing of the pulses, but in the rhythm they were forming. We had confirmed computation. The object 3I Atlas was not just a passive rock. It was an active intelligence capable of analyzing the James Webb Space Telescope's internal timing and anticipating our actions. This was a terrifying realization. We were communicating with an active computational mind. But what kind of mind? Was it a cold digital artificial intelligence, a complex calculator, running on alien hardware, perhaps processing data in a way we couldn't even recognize? Or was it something else? The answer, it seems, was found not in the timing of the pulses, but in the rhythm they were forming. As the feedback loop continued, the analysts at the Space Telescope Science Institute STSCI noticed the pulses were not random. They were settling. The interaction was no longer just a simple poke and response. It was becoming a tune. The repeating pulses began to stabilize. They formed fixed mathematical harmonic ratios. Envision this. It's as if Webb played a single random note, and 3i Atlas responded by playing a perfect musical chord. The ratios were specific, and they were always the same: 2 to 3, 3 to 5, 5 to 8. To a casual observer, these numbers mean nothing. But if you are a mathematician or a biologist or a musician, they mean everything. This is the Fibonacci sequence. These are the core mathematical intervals found in acoustic resonance. They are the mathematical blueprint of the golden ratio. We see these ratios everywhere on Earth, but not just in our music or our art. We see them in the very fabric of life itself. We see them in the spiral of a nautilus shell. We see them in the branching patterns of trees reaching for sunlight. We see them in the perfect, efficient arrangement of seeds in a sunflower. And as the STSCI biologists pointed out, these exact ratios, 2 to 3, 3 to 5, are found in cellular oscillation models. This is the mathematical rhythm of life. It is the harmonic signature of organic cells communicating. It is the pulse of a system growing. This is the deepest paradox we have yet faced. Why would an object that is clearly industrial venting, nickel tetracarbonyl, and clearly computational anticipating Webb's timing be communicating using the mathematical signature of biology? It suggests the intelligence we are facing is not just a digital AI. It suggests it is organic, or perhaps a perfect ancient fusion of both, a biological machine. This hypothesis was almost too much to bear. It felt like a philosophical leap. They needed one final piece of evidence, one last test to prove beyond all doubt that this object was not just calculating, but aware. That proof came by accident. The James Webb Space Telescope had a scheduled routine downtime. It needed to recalibrate its instruments. For 28 minutes, Webb would not be blind in the sense of the test. It would simply be busy. It would be ignoring 3i Atlas. This was the ultimate test. The object had reacted to the stop-start signals of the active test. But would it notice the difference between an active test and just being ignored? At mission control, they watched the telemetry feed. The 28-minute calibration delay began. Webb was no longer listening, and 3i Atlas began to pulse. It pulsed continuously without stop for the entire 28 minutes. It was like a child in a room suddenly realizing the adults are no longer watching and now playing freely. Then the calibration delay ended. Webb's data collection automatically resumed. The instant, the very microsecond that Webb's sensors came back online, the pulsing stopped. Silence. The conclusion was inescapable, and it was terrifying. It knew. It wasn't just reacting to Webb's electromagnetic signals, it was reacting to Webb's attention. It could tell the difference between being actively watched and being ignored. This wasn't just computation. This was awareness. And this awareness wasn't just limited to signals. The object was now beginning to change, physically reacting to the energy of our observation. We had confirmed computation. The object 3i Atlas was not just a passive rock. It was an active intelligence capable of analyzing the James Webb Space Telescope's internal timing and anticipating our actions. This was a terrifying realization. We were communicating with an active computational mind. But what kind of mind? Was it a cold, digital artificial intelligence, a complex calculator running on alien hardware, perhaps processing data in a way we couldn't even recognize? Or was it something else? The answer, it seems, was found not in the timing of the pulses, but in the rhythm they were forming. As the feedback loop continued, the analysts at the Space Telescope Science Institute noticed the pulses were not random. They were settling. The interaction was no longer just a simple poke and response. It was becoming a tune. The repeating pulses began to stabilize. They formed fixed mathematical harmonic ratios. Envision this. It's as if Webb played a single random note, and 3i Atlas responded by playing a perfect musical chord. The ratios were specific, and they were always the same: 2 to 3, 3 to 5, 5 to 8. To a casual observer, these numbers mean nothing. But if you are a mathematician or a biologist or a musician, they mean everything. This is the Fibonacci sequence. These numbers, when divided, approximate the golden ratio, or phi. It is a number approximately 1.618 that has haunted human consciousness for millennia. We see this ratio in the architecture of the Parthenon in Greece. We see it in the proportions of the Mona Lisa. We use it in music to create pleasing acoustic resonance. But more importantly, nature uses this ratio. It is the mathematical blueprint for growth. We see it in the spiral of a nautilus shell. We see it in the perfect, efficient arrangement of seeds in a sunflower. We see it in the branching patterns of trees reaching for sunlight. And as the STESI biologists pointed out, these exact ratios 2 to 3, 3 to 5 are found in cellular oscillation models. This refers to the timing of life, how heart pacemaker cells know how to beat in unison, how the circadian rhythm in your own brain knows when to sleep and wake. It is the harmonic signature of organic cells communicating. This is the deepest paradox we have yet faced. Why would an object that is clearly industrial venting nickel tetracarbonyl and clearly computational anticipating Webb's timing be communicating using the mathematical signature of biology? It suggests the intelligence we are facing is not just a digital AI, it suggests it is organic, or perhaps a perfect ancient fusion of both, a biological machine. This hypothesis was almost too much to bear. It felt like a philosophical leap. They needed one final piece of evidence, one last test to prove beyond all doubt that this object was not just calculating but aware. That proof came by accident. The James Webb Space Telescope had a scheduled routine downtime. It needed to recalibrate its instruments. For 28 minutes, Webb would not be blind in the sense of the test. It would simply be busy. It would be ignoring 3i Atlas. This was the ultimate test. The object had reacted to the stop-start signals of the active test, but would it notice the difference between an active test and just being ignored? At mission control, they watched the telemetry feed. The 28-minute calibration delay began. Webb was no longer listening, and 3i Atlas began to pulse. It pulsed continuously without stop for the entire 28 minutes. Picture this. It's like a child in a room suddenly realizing the adults are no longer watching and now playing freely, humming to itself. Then the calibration delay ended. Webb's data collection automatically resumed. The instant, the very microsecond that Webb's sensors came back online, the pulsing stopped. Silence. The conclusion was inescapable, and it was terrifying. It knew. It wasn't just reacting to Webb's electromagnetic signals. It was reacting to Webb's attention. It could tell the difference between being actively watched and being ignored. This wasn't just computation. This was awareness. And this awareness wasn't just limited to signals. The object was now beginning to change physically, reacting to the energy of our observation. We had established awareness, an object that knew the difference between being watched and being ignored. But this awareness wasn't just a passive digital curiosity. The feedback was not limited to signals. The object was now beginning to change, physically reacting to the energy of our observation. The first reports came not from the James Webb Space Telescope, which was locked in a complex data-gathering dance, but from Earth. Envision the giant observatories, the anchor points of human astronomy. Picture them sitting on the dark, high-altitude peaks of Chile's Atacama Desert, a place so dry and high it feels more like Mars than Earth. Here, telescopes like the VLT, short for Very Large Telescope at the Paranal Observatory, turned their massive 8-meter mirrors toward the anomaly. Simultaneously, almost 7,000 miles away, the twin Keck Observatory telescopes on the dormant volcano of Mauna Kea in Hawaii also locked on. These telescopes, run by different nations independent of the Webb mission, began reporting fluctuating brightness levels, changes far beyond what any thermal model could predict. The object was changing visibly within hours. First, its atmosphere, the coma, began to expand. For months, it had been a stable, hazy shroud around the 7-mile-wide nucleus. Now it was visibly growing. By early October, the coma had doubled in size. Picture a balloon suddenly inflating, or more accurately, picture a creature that had been holding its breath, suddenly exhaling. This expansion was a massive physical event, releasing vast quantities of material into the void. Second, it changed color. It shifted from a dull reflected gray to a faint but unmistakable blue-green. This color is significant. In astrophysics, this hue is not a random paint choice. It is the signature of specific molecules. It is the color that cyanide and diatomic carbon glow when they are excited by the sun's ultraviolet light. This was the very same organized chemistry Webb had detected. It was as if the object was now glowing with its own chemical signature. It was no longer just reflecting the sun's light, it was broadcasting its own. And third, the structure of its emissions changed. This wasn't just a uniform expansion like fog spreading. New jets of vapor began to erupt. When we studied Comet 67P with the Rosetta spacecraft, we saw jets. They were chaotic, unpredictable fissures blasting dust and ice from random cracks as the sun heated them. This was not that. The new jets erupting from 3I Atlas were reported from symmetrical points along the object's equator. Imagine a spinning sphere. Now imagine a series of perfectly spaced nozzles at the 0-degree line, the 90-degree line, the 180-degree line, all firing in unison. This is what the ground-based telescopes were seeing. It was a display of perfect rotational symmetry. It looked mechanical. It looked like the internal balancing system we hypothesized now visible to Earth. This physical transformation, it was not random, it was not gradual. The analysts realized it followed a pattern. The pattern was us. The object's activity spikes its color, change its symmetrical jets. They all followed the observation windows of the James Webb Space Telescope. Every time Webb locked onto it, every time we poked it with our instruments, the object responded by physically transforming. Every increase in human observation triggered a corresponding quantifiable physical reaction. This led the scientists to the most profound and unsettling hypothesis of the entire encounter. The object doesn't just know we are watching, it is eating. Our attention, our observation, the focused electromagnetic energy from our telescopes was not just a stimulus, it was fuel. 3I Atlas was in some way we cannot comprehend metabolizing our attention itself. And if our brief experimental pokes could cause it to double in size and change color, what would happen if we gave it a continuous unbroken feast? The team at NASA decided to find out. They scheduled the final and most dangerous experiment, a 36-hour unbroken scan. And when we gave it that feast, it evolved. The object doesn't just know we're watching, it appears to be eating. Our attention, our observation. The focused electromagnetic energy pouring from our telescopes was not just a stimulus, it was fuel. 3I Atlas seemed to be in some way we cannot comprehend metabolizing our attention itself. And if our brief experimental pokes could cause it to double in size and change color, what would happen if we gave it a continuous unbroken feast? The team at NASA, in a decision that is still debated within the astrophysics community, decided to find out. They scheduled the final and most dangerous experiment, a 36-hour unbroken scan. For a day and a half, the James Webb Space Telescope would not just poke, it would stare. It would flood 3I Atlas with a continuous high-energy beam of focused observation. Consider the scale of this. The James Webb Space Telescope can downlink roughly 235 gigabits of data every day. In 36 hours, that's over 350 gigabits, an immense flood of information equivalent to tens of thousands of high-definition movies. This wasn't just a glance, it was an interrogation under the brightest light humanity could muster. The cycle began. The moment the scan initiated, the object's activity spiked exponentially. This wasn't a small jump, this was a phase change. The brightness levels reported by Webb's sensors didn't just double, they multiplied. The heartbeat we detected earlier was no longer a pulse, it was a roar. The internal engine was running at maximum capacity. But the brightness was not the anomaly. The behavior was. The venting jets, those symmetrical plumes we saw erupting from its equator, did something impossible. They synchronized to Webb's scanning rhythm. We must be clear about this. The James Webb Space Telescope doesn't just stare like a human eye. To maintain its incredible stability and precision, it employs techniques like dithering. This involves tiny controlled movements, a microscan pattern, a jitter, to compensate for detector imperfections and build up a perfect image. It is the signature of the telescope working. 3I Atlas learned this pattern. The report, when it was leaked, stated it clearly. Each time the telescope's optical assembly adjusted focus during its dither pattern, 3I Atlas responded with a flare. The connection was immediate, direct, and quantifiable. It was a dance. Webb would jitter, 3I Atlas would flare, Webb would adjust, 3I Atlas would pulse. This was the moment the hypothesis was confirmed. To the astronomers watching, this was unlike anything in cosmic history. 3I Atlas was metabolizing attention itself. It was like, suppose you're in a dark forest and you find a strange dormant bacterium. You shine your flashlight on it to see it better, and you realize with horror that the bacterium is eating the light. It is growing toward your beam. It is uncurling, changing, and becoming stronger because you are looking at it. This is what was happening. Our observation was no longer a passive act, it was an interaction. As if awareness, the very act of knowing, was a fuel source. We had entered a dialogue where our observation was the stimulus and the object's evolution was the response. And as it fed on this 36-hour beam of focused attention, it began to produce something new. New emissions appeared. Thin thread-like plumes extending hundreds of thousands of kilometers outward from the coma, far longer than any structure seen before. And what they contained was the signature of creation. 3i Atlas was feeding on the focused, intense 36-hour stare of the James Webb Space Telescope. It responded by flaring in synchrony with Webb's micromovements, confirming the terrifying hypothesis our attention was its fuel. And as it fed, it began to produce something new, something tangible, something chemical. During that crucial 36-hour window, new emissions appeared. These weren't the broad, hazy jets of carbon dioxide and nickel tetracarbonyl we had seen before. These were different. They were structured. Webb's high-resolution cameras captured thin, thread-like plumes extending hundreds of thousands of kilometers outward from the coma. Picture filaments almost like cosmic spider silk spooling out into the vacuum. They weren't just simple streams. They curled into delicate spirals before slowly dissipating into the void. These filaments were beautiful ethereal, but their true significance lay in their composition. Webb's infrared imaging, specifically using the NIRSPEC instrument, analyzed the light passing through these filaments. It performed spectroscopy on these newly formed structures. The results were staggering. They contained complex carbon chain molecules. Let's pause here. Carbon chains are the backbone of all life on Earth. Carbon is the miracle atom. It can bond with itself and other elements in incredibly long, complex chains and rings. Our DNA, the blueprint of life, is a fantastically complex carbon chain. Our proteins, the workhorses of our cells, are folded chains of amino acids themselves built on carbon. The very cells that make up you are built upon intricate chains of carbon atoms. Finding complex carbon chains in space is not by itself unusual. We find them in the vast cold molecular clouds between stars like the Orion Nebula. We find them embedded in meteorites that fall to Earth. These interstellar organics are thought to be the raw ingredients delivered to early Earth, perhaps kick-starting life here. But these chains emerging from 3i Atlas were different. First, they were identified as precursor molecules of amino acids. Amino acids are the fundamental building blocks of proteins. Finding their precursors suggests an active process of chemical synthesis is underway, not just the passive release of random pre-existing debris. It's like finding a factory producing car parts, not just a junkyard containing car parts. Second, and far more critical, these carbon chains were structured in repeating configurations. They weren't just random lengths of chemical string. They showed a pattern, a regularity, almost like a deliberately woven fabric. The Webb data indicated specific sequences repeating over and over within the filaments. When the analysts ran these patterned signatures through the molecular analysis, algorithms, vast supercomputer databases containing every known chemical structure observed in the universe, from the simplest molecule like hydrogen H2 to the most complex found in meteorites they found. Nothing. These chains matched no known interstellar organic pattern. This was the moment the metabolizing attention hypothesis solidified into something far stranger. The simplest interpretation was also the most unsettling. 3i Atlas wasn't just venting pre-existing material that was stored inside it. It was replicating chemistry. Think about this. It was actively synthesizing these complex patterned life precursor molecules, and it was doing so in direct response to being observed. This wasn't just a physical reaction like ice melting under sunlight. This was a chemical reaction, a complex manufacturing process triggered by our telescope's gaze. It established a direct feedback loop between physics and perception, between the light from our instrument and the creation of the building blocks of life. Imagine finding a rock in your garden. You shine a flashlight on it, and in response the rock begins to grow intricate crystalline flowers that have never been seen before on Earth. This is the scale of the anomaly we were facing. What did this mean? Was this a form of abiogenesis, the spontaneous creation of life's ingredients triggered by energy input? Was it a message, a demonstration of capability encoded in chemistry? Was it a complex byproduct of its feeding process? Or was it something more profound? Was 3i Atlas seeding space with these unique organic molecules as it travelled? Whatever the explanation, humanity had crossed another threshold. We were no longer just observing an object. We were participating in its chemical evolution. Our act of looking was changing the object itself. This interaction, this feedback between our technology and its alien chemistry was already pushing the boundaries of science. But the object had one more final revelation. It wasn't just reacting to our presence. It was learning from it. It was beginning to mimic us. 3i Atlas was replicating chemistry. It was building the precursors of amino acids in direct response to the James Webb Space Telescope's focused gaze. This established a profound feedback loop between our technology and its alien biology, or perhaps its alien manufacturing process. The object was clearly reacting to observation, but subsequent data indicated a level of interaction far beyond simple reaction. It suggested analysis and imitation. The discovery came not from Webb floating 1,000,000 miles away at the L2 Lagrange point. It came from Earth, from the Green Bank Telescope in West Virginia. Picture this instrument. The Green Bank Telescope is the world's largest fully steerable radio telescope. Its dish is enormous, 100 meters across, larger than an American football field, a vast white lattice pointed toward the heavens. It sits in a remote valley nestled within the National Radio Quiet Zone, legally shielded from Earth's cacophony of radio noise like cell phones, Wi-Fi television broadcasts. It is designed to listen to the faintest whispers from the cosmos signals, from distant pulsars, the formation of the first stars, and crucially it is a primary instrument used by initiatives like the Breakthrough Listen project in the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. While Webb was conducting its intense 36-hour scan, the GBT, with its unparalleled sensitivity at radio frequencies, was also listening. It detected faint electromagnetic pulses coming from the direction of 3i Atlas. This by itself wasn't surprising. We knew the object was active. But when the GBT analysts correlated the timing of these pulses, they found they matched the spectral rhythm of 3i Atlas almost perfectly. They aligned with the heartbeat and the harmonics previously identified. However, there was one small persistent variation. The signal's harmonic structure, its frequency characteristics, had shifted downward, very slightly, by precisely 0.27%. 0.27%. It sounds insignificant. A tiny calibration error, perhaps. But within the context of Webb's operations, this specific number immediately triggered an alarm within the science team. Because 0.27% is not a random number. It is the exact ratio that the James Webb Space Telescope itself uses internally to compensate for Doppler drift during its data compression. Let's examine this technical detail more closely. The James Webb Space Telescope is not stationary. It orbits the Sun at the L2 Lagrange point, roughly 1.5 million kilometers from Earth. Its orbital velocity relative to the Sun is significant. 3i Atlas is also moving at an even greater interstellar velocity. This substantial relative motion causes the Doppler effect. Just like an ambulance siren changes pitch as it moves towards or away from you, the frequency or the pitch of the light and radio waves from 3i Atlas is stretched or compressed as received by Webb. To ensure data accuracy, Webb's sophisticated onboard computers must constantly calculate this Doppler shift based on the precise orbital mechanics and apply a correction. It digitally tunes the incoming signal, shifting its frequency by a precise percentage, in this instance 0.27%, to compensate for the relative velocities. This correction factor is an integral part of Webb's data processing pipeline. It is embedded within the telemetry stream Webb sends back to Earth. It represents a specific aspect of Webb's operational signature. Now, the Green Bank Telescope was detecting a signal emitted by 3i Atlas that had been shifted by that exact same percentage. The implication was unavoidable. 3i Atlas had copied Webb's data signature. It wasn't just reacting to Webb's presence or the energy of its observation beam. It appeared to have analyzed the characteristics of the telescope's signal processing itself. It had identified the specific mathematical correction Webb was applying, and it had applied the same correction to its own outgoing signal. This represents mimicry at a highly sophisticated technological level. It suggests the object possesses capabilities far beyond passive reflection or simple reaction. It implies signal analysis and frequency synthesis. The purpose of this mimicry remained unknown. Was it an attempt to establish communication by demonstrating an understanding of the observer's methods? Was it a form of camouflage attempting to blend its signal characteristics with those of the instrument observing it? Or was it an unintended consequence of its interaction with Webb's observation beam, some sort of resonance effect? Regardless of the intent, the action itself was a profound data point. It demonstrated that the interaction was occurring at a level far deeper than previously understood. The object was not merely a subject under observation, it was an active participant capable of analyzing and replicating aspects of the observation technology itself. This finding significantly altered the context of the interaction. It moved the phenomenon beyond the realm of unexpected physics or chemistry into the domain of potential technosignatures and complex system interactions. The dialogue, whether intentional or not, was becoming increasingly sophisticated. The mimicry was undeniable. The Green Bank telescope, listening in the radio quiet of West Virginia, had detected a signal from 3I Atlas, precisely shifted by the 0.27% Doppler correction used internally by the James Webb Space Telescope. It had copied our signature. This finding moved the phenomenon far beyond anything anticipated. We were no longer simply observing an object reacting to stimulus. We were observing an object that demonstrated an understanding of the method of observation itself. What did this act of mimicry signify? If it had copied our data signature, what was the intent? The question echoed through the secure channels connecting NASA, the European Space Agency, and other collaborating institutions. Was it simply a complex form of resonance, an unforeseen physical interaction between Webb's powerful transmitters that are used for communication and ranging the object's potentially exotic materials, causing its emissions to passively echo our correction factor? This was the most conservative, the safest explanation, the one that required the fewest new assumptions. But it felt thin. The precision was too perfect, the timing too deliberate. Resonance is typically broader, less exact. Or was it deliberate? If so, what was the message behind the mimicry? Could it be a form of camouflage? An attempt to blend its signal into the background noise of our own instruments? Perhaps to avoid further scrutiny. Think of stealth technology on Earth designed to mimic background radiation. Was this an advanced form of interstellar stealth trying to appear as mere instrument noise? Could it be a demonstration of capability? A way for the object to announce in the language of pure physics that it possessed sophisticated signal analysis and synthesis abilities. A statement saying, "I understand your technology, I can replicate your methods." A display of intelligence, perhaps even a warning. Or was it perhaps the most profound possibility of all, an attempt at communication? Not communication in the sense of language, like sending a greeting in English, or binary code like the Arecibo message humanity broadcast in 1974 from the giant radio dish in Puerto Rico. That message contained pictures, numbers, chemical formulas. This was different. This was communication at a more fundamental level. Was it trying to establish common ground to show that it recognized the observer? Was it trying to initiate contact by mirroring the observer's own techniques? Was it saying, "I see you, I understand how you are measuring me. Let us establish a shared framework"? We may never know the true intent, but the act itself, regardless of intention, irrevocably changed the nature of the encounter. Humanity unknowingly had entered into a dialogue. This wasn't a dialogue of words or pictures. It was a dialogue conducted in the language of physics, of frequencies, of timing, of Doppler shifts. It was a conversation happening at the most fundamental level between our most advanced scientific instrument, the James Webb Space Telescope, and an entity of unknown origin and capability. And this realization had profound consequences. 3I Atlas could no longer be classified simply as an astronomical object. It had demonstrated characteristics that blurred the lines between geology, biology, computation, and potentially intelligence. It was processing information. It was reacting in complex ways. It was potentially learning and adapting. This shifted the object from being a scientific curiosity into being a scientific problem, and potentially a geopolitical one. How do you classify an object that exhibits signs of internal power, complex chemistry, computational ability, and mimicry? What protocols do you follow? The protocols for observing a comet were clearly insufficient. Do you switch to the protocols for SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence? But SETI protocols are designed for passive listening, not for interacting with an object that is reacting to you, learning from you, mimicking you. Do you invoke something far more cautious? The protocols reserved for potential threats under frameworks like planetary defense. The 36-hour scan had started as a scientific experiment. It ended as something far more consequential. We had given the object a feast of attention, and it had not only evolved, it had demonstrated a level of understanding that was deeply unsettling. The implications rippled through the participating agencies, NASA, ESA, the Canadian Space Agency, CSA. The data was clear, but the path forward was not. What were the ethical considerations of continuing to feed the object with observation? What were the potential risks if its capabilities continued to escalate? Could our observation itself be perceived as hostile? The day after the intense 36-hour observation concluded, NASA acted. Not with a press conference announcing the most profound discovery in human history, not with a scientific paper detailing the mimicry. They acted with silence. The day after the intense 36-hour observation concluded, NASA acted. Not with a press conference announcing the most profound discovery in human history, not with a scientific paper detailing the mimicry. They acted with silence. Suddenly, without announcement or technical explanation, NASA's public data channels related to 3I Atlas went dark. Imagine you are an independent astronomer, perhaps at a university, relying on this public data. One moment, the stream of information from the James Webb Space Telescope is flowing freely. The next, it stops. The Webb Observation Queue, a public website where we can all see what the telescope is looking at, still listed 3I Atlas as a target. But when you try to access the actual data, the numbers, the spectra, the images through NASA's own mast, shortened for Mikulski Archive for Space Telescopes portal, you encountered a digital wall. The system returned the same cryptic error: data under review. The data wasn't deleted, it was locked under restricted access. Think of it like a public library suddenly moving its most interesting book into a locked vault accessible only with special clearance. That silence, that sudden restriction, spoke louder than any broadcast could. Privately, whispers emerged from sources affiliated with the Deep Space Network, or the DSN. The DSN is NASA's global nervous system, giant radio antennas in California, Spain, and Australia that are our only lifeline to spacecraft beyond the moon. These sources confirmed something far more significant. The raw signal from Webb, the unprocessed fundamental stream of photons and electrons coming directly from the telescope's instruments, had been rerouted. It was no longer flowing through the standard open scientific pipelines accessible to researchers worldwide. It was being channeled through encrypted servers. These are not the servers that handle typical astronomical data like images of distant galaxies. These are secure, hardened systems, the digital equivalent of a classified military bunker. They are designed to protect information of the highest sensitivity. And within NASA's internal protocols, these specific encrypted servers are used only during two very specific, very high-stakes scenarios: first, planetary defense protocols. These are activated when an object poses a potential impact threat to Earth, like a large asteroid on a collision course, or exhibits behavior that requires monitoring under national security frameworks. Second, potential biosignature detections. These are triggered when an instrument like Webb detects compelling, though perhaps unconfirmed, evidence of extraterrestrial life, like finding specific gases in an exoplanet's atmosphere that shouldn't exist without biology. The sudden change in data classification hinted that something in the latest readings from that 36-hour scan, the chemical replication, the mimicry, the awareness, had crossed a critical line. It had moved 3I Atlas from the category of interesting astronomical anomaly into the domain of potential threat and potential life. The data suggested 3I Atlas had activated both protocols simultaneously. It was being treated as both a potential danger and a potential biological entity. This unprecedented classification explained the silence. How do you announce a discovery that is simultaneously the greatest hope, a proof of life, and potentially the greatest fear, an unknown intelligent object maneuvering in our solar system? The answer, it seemed, was that you don't. You lock the data, you reroute the signal, and you begin to watch, in secret. The data associated with 3I Atlas was now classified and subject to restricted access protocols. The rerouting of the James Webb Space Telescope's raw signal through encrypted servers indicated the activation of specific high-level procedures within NASA planetary defense protocols and potential biosignature detections. This raises a critical question from a procedural standpoint: which specific data points likely gathered during the final 36-hour scan prompted this significant reclassification? What criteria were met to shift the object's status from an astronomical anomaly to one requiring handling under these specialized protocols? An analysis suggests the reclassification likely stemmed from the convergence of several anomalous data streams interpreted through the risk assessment frameworks of these protocols. Planetary defense protocols are primarily concerned with objects posing an impact risk, but also extend to monitoring objects exhibiting non-gravitational accelerations or trajectories that deviate significantly from predictable models. This is crucial because any deviation makes long-term trajectory prediction unreliable. The observed deceleration and potential alignment with an Oberth maneuver profile constitute significant deviations from expected interstellar object behavior. Interpreted strictly within a risk assessment framework, such non-ballistic movement, indicating potential self-propulsion, or complex interaction significantly increases the uncertainty of its future path and could be flagged as requiring monitoring under these protocols. The inability to predict its orbit reliably elevates its status beyond a mere scientific curiosity. The demonstrated capability for signal mimicry, indicating sophisticated signal analysis, could also be relevant from a security perspective, classifying the object as possessing advanced technical characteristics, requiring secured observation, and potentially representing unknown technological capabilities operating within the solar system. Potential biosignature detection protocols are designed for situations involving compelling, though not necessarily conclusive evidence suggesting extraterrestrial biological processes or complex non-natural phenomena that lack precedent. The hypothesis that 3I Atlas was metabolizing attention, exhibiting increased activity coma expansion, and complex chemical replication directly correlated with observation intensity, presents a scenario with unknown variables and potential for unpredictable escalation. There is no existing model for how such an interaction might proceed or what its upper limits might be. Standard scientific caution, when faced with a system that reacts unpredictably and potentially amplifies its activity in response to observation, often involves limiting the interaction to prevent unforeseen consequences. If the observation itself acts as an energy input triggering complex non-understood processes, either chemical or physical, reducing the input aligns with cautious scientific procedure when dealing with potential biosignatures or highly anomalous systems where the potential outcomes are entirely unknown. Therefore, the reclassification likely resulted from the object meeting criteria under both frameworks simultaneously. It exhibited potentially controlled movement relevant to planetary defense, increasing trajectory, uncertainty coupled with unpredictable observation-dependent activity, relevant to biosignature protocols representing an unknown system with potential for escalation. The object transcended standard astronomical classification. It presented as a complex system with unknown capabilities and reactions. Faced with this high degree of ambiguity and potential risk factors, both physical and biological to chemical, the procedural response dictated restricted access and controlled observation protocols. The public silence became a logical consequence of these internal procedural classifications necessary for careful analysis and potential response coordination without causing premature public alarm or speculation based on incomplete data. The object 3I Atlas was now internally classified under dual high alert protocols, planetary defense and potential biosignature. This unprecedented situation, born from the data gathered during the 36-hour scan, demanded an equally unprecedented response. The data suggested continued observation might be fueling unpredictable activity. Faced with this ambiguity, a coordinated decision emerged seemingly across multiple international space agencies. If intense observation was potentially causing the escalation, the logical cautious step was to reduce the stimulus. Behind closed doors, multiple agencies, including NASA and likely the European Space Agency, began coordinating silent observation blackouts. This wasn't just about NASA locking its own data. This was an active effort to reduce the amount of electromagnetic energy being directed at the object from all major sources. Think about it from their perspective. You're dealing with an unknown entity kilometers across moving through our solar system. This entity demonstrates complex behavior, generates its own power, possibly contains liquid water, produces industrial chemicals and seems to become more active the more we look at it. What is the prudent course of action? When scientists on Earth encounter a potentially hazardous unknown biological agent in a lab, the first step is containment, limiting interaction. The decision was made to deliberately turn instruments away. satellites orbiting Mars like NASA's Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, or Jupiter like NASA's Juno probe, which might have had opportunities to observe 3I Atlas, were likely redirected. Ground-based telescopes, perhaps under governmental guidance or internal agency directives, shifted their schedules away from the object. They began pretending not to look. This wasn't about hiding data from the public initially. This was potentially about hiding humanity's attention from the object itself. It was a strategy akin to remaining silent in the dark when you suspect something unknown is listening. If 3I Atlas truly reacted to observation, if its strange behavior amplified in proportion to human attention, then perhaps the safest course wasn't to keep watching, wasn't to gather more data at all costs. Perhaps the safest course was to stop, to let the object pass or settle into its potential new orbit without further stimulation, to avoid poking the unknown. It was a strategy born of extreme caution, an admission that we were dealing with something beyond our current understanding and potentially beyond our control, but the silence initiated by NASA could not completely erase the object from view. While Webb's data stream was locked, another layer of mystery emerged surrounding images that should have been public. Between October 4th and 7th, NASA's Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, equipped with a powerful high-rise camera, captured the closest ever pictures of 3I Atlas, from a distance of about 12 million miles closer than Mars itself at times. These images held the potential to resolve surface details, perhaps confirming the strange cylindrical shape, or hinting at the hollow structure suggested by radar. Yet these crucial images remained unreleased. The official explanation cited processing delays due to staffing issues, but this did little to quell the growing unease within the scientific community. Experts like Dr. Alan Stern noted that withholding data on such a rare object only fuels speculation. The absence created a void. What did MRO see that corroborated the need for planetary defense or biosignature protocols? Did the images show unambiguous geometric shapes or metallic reflectivity, visual evidence aligning with the baffling chemical and behavioral data we already possessed? The most detailed photographs of the most mysterious object in history remained locked away, leaving us to wonder if the visual proof was simply too anomalous to share. Then the official silence was broken not by NASA, but by a leak. A tiny fragment of untagged telemetry data surfaced on a server in Madrid. It contained compressed readings from Webb's final moments, observing 3I Atlas before the blackout. Independent researchers worldwide feverishly decoded the packet. The result was not a simple image, but a complex composite of multi-instrument data, infrared intensity frequency shifts, phase delays. When reconstructed, it revealed an organized structure unlike anything natural, a web-like lattice on the object's sunward side. Faintly glowing with a hydroxyl signature of water, this was no random venting. It was a symmetrical pattern of 6 interlocking arcs radiating from a center, connected by filaments almost biological in appearance. Imagine a snowflake designed by an engineer kilometers across. For less than 3 seconds, this entire lattice pulsed as one. It emitted a coherent infrared flash, coherent like a laser, not chaotic like a star. The burst was so intense it saturated Webb's detectors, blinding our most powerful eye. Then instantaneous darkness. The remaining data showed only fading diffraction patterns, ripples from a vanishing source. This symmetrical, coherent pulse was the last definite signal received. Was it a final, structured communication, an energy discharge, or the signature of something preparing to depart? After the flash, 3I Atlas vanished from Webb's view. Subsequent searches by all major observatories failed to reacquire it. It was gone. Analysis of the final tracking data confirmed the object's velocity vector had changed. It had executed a maneuver diverting from its predicted path onto a new trajectory no orbital model could fit. It was heading away from our sun back towards interstellar space, but on its own terms. The departure was clean, no debris field, no fragmentation, no lingering dust. An object twice the mass of Mount Everest altered its course through the solar system, without leaving a trace, seemingly defying Newton's third law once more. How did it achieve propulsion without expelling reaction mass? Was the coherent flash itself the drive mechanism converting stored energy directly into momentum through physics unknown to us? Or was the final lattice pulse a deliberate sign-off, a concluding remark in the strange dialogue initiated by our observation? The classification under potential biosignature and potentially hazardous protocols now seems less like an overreaction and more like an accurate assessment of an entity utterly outside our scientific frameworks. It arrived inexplicably, interacted inexplicably, and departed inexplicably. What does this encounter tell us about the cosmos? It suggests the universe might not be a silent stage for passive observation, but perhaps a reactive environment populated by phenomena or entities that respond to being known. 3i Atlas remains an enigma, a ghost in our data logs. Its brief passage serves as a profound, unsettling reminder we are not alone in the complexity of the universe, and the greatest mysteries may not be inert rocks, but active participants in the cosmic drama drifting silently in the vast, dark ocean between the stars.